Judge orders portion of the Mar-a-Lago search affidavit unsealed after the DOJ redaction.
Ask you too about this breaking news we're just getting out of this court in Florida where the Mar-a-Lago search affidavit was being decided on. It's a little nuanced, but help us understand the decisions that we're getting now.
Yeah, so essentially the judge wants to see proposed redactions from DOJ that could come out and see this underlying warrant. I think DOJ's redactions would be so heavy that DOJ at least has said that they would render it essentially useless, that they wouldn't be able, there wouldn't be any more information or context that you could get because they would want to redact so much of this because they don't want to give Donald Trump essentially a roadmap to this investigation and say it is in the very early stages. What the judge has decided, Aaron, is that they don't think that DOJ should be making those decisions about whether or not that's actually useful, whether or not this information should be released. So he wants to see what those proposed redactions would be, and we might end up with a heavily redacted version of this that would give us some information, but probably not a ton of information about where this investigation is headed in the future, Aaron.
So just to make sure I'm clear, Ryan, we're not going to see a document of any sort today. The government has a chance to go back and so this has not been unsealed. It's not being sealed necessarily either. And it's going to take some time before a real final ruling is made on that, right?
Precisely. Yeah, this won't be an instant turnaround, but we should be hearing back this in the coming days to see where those proposed redactions.
Wait, what the fuck is this? That's so funny. You guys are so dumb.
Land and whether or not there's any information that could be turned over, even if it's not extraordinary, earth-shattering information, so that that I guess a lot of the news organizations want to come out of this, Aaron.
Yeah. All right. Ryan Riley for us in D.C. Ryan, thank you. I want to bring in our NBC News legal analyst, Danny Ceballos now. Danny, I want to say this is unexpected, right? I think the wisdom that had been sort of talked about through the last couple of weeks here was that this was going to be a document that remained sealed. What are your thoughts about what we're hearing from the court today?
Special times call for special measures. I still say that in 99 out of 100 of these cases, it's a no-brainer. There is no unsealing of the affidavit of probable cause. But in a case like this, with such public interest and involving the most unique person upon whom a search warrant has ever been served, that the rules tend to change a little bit. Yet, this is a judge, a magistrate judge, saying not necessarily that it's going to be unsealed, but that some of it might be, not exactly sure what that's going to mean, but it has to be somewhat of a surprise to DOJ that the judge is going in this direction.
So what would be the harm done here then, Danny, if in fact there were useful parts of this affidavit that would be unsealed to the media organizations and to the Trump team?
Well, the value to the media organizations is the same value to the public at large. We want to see it. There's intense public interest. But the value to the Trumps is a little different. It's more like, can we find out what the government has on us, and can we find out who's been snitching on us? I mean, that's how they might put it. That's, of course, not how the government would put it. And the government's concern, which I think is a legitimate one, is if you disclose the search warrant affidavit, I keep calling it the search warrant affidavit, it's the affidavit of probable cause. That is written in a narrative form. And yes, it might not identify specific witnesses or cooperators by name, but with enough of a narrative, you can piece together who's who and who's doing the disclosing. So not only does it compromise the investigation, it could potentially compromise the source of the information who gave it to agents with the idea that, look, I'm going to give this to you, but I don't plan on testifying. I don't want it put out there. And that could be a problem, too, for law enforcement. I mean, I am really surprised that there is even a discussion in court about this. But, you know, look, it might also be that the judge is just looking at every possibility, every angle, because this is arguably one of the more important search warrants ever served in search warrant history, unlike the hundreds, maybe thousands that are requested, issued, and served every day across this country that we never hear about. Those are the kinds that you would never get the affidavit of probable cause unless and until the government wants to turn that document over. This is an unusual situation, and therefore we're seeing unusual rules emerge.
I want to ask you about redactions here, right? I mean, as I understand the notes that we're getting out of court, the judge is telling the government you can go through this affidavit and make the redactions that you think should be there. The judge would then look at it himself and decide whether he agrees with the redactions or would want to do something different. What level of redaction would you anticipate from the DOJ for a document like this, considering that there's still an investigation that's going on?
I have a vision of the artist Rothko that comes to mind, and it's going to be just giant blocks, not of blues or reds. It'll be all black. That's what I expect. I mean, large blocks of redacted documents, the kind that ruin the toner in your printer when you try to print them out. This is going to be something that the government is going to heavily redact. Anything that remotely relates to a confidential source or to somebody who may also be a target subject.
Surely Chad would be fine with you getting up and being away from stream for 20 minutes a couple times a day. They would not spam anything. They would not go and make YouTube videos about it if I were to do that. Look at this, bro. Just make a whole ass Qdoba bowl, just like 15 ingredients, hours of prep time, marinated chicken, grill it, make it perfect rice, guac. The fuck is this guy saying? Yep, exactly.
Something like that is going to be redacted. That's my expectation. And I have to believe the government lawyers are going back to their offices saying, I can't believe that this is even something we have to do now. I would expect that they're very surprised that this is even in play. But look, the government's very good at redacting. They do it fairly often. We've seen that during the Mueller investigation, during some of the other investigations over the last few years. They have no problem redacting entire pages and covering them in black. And so that is what I would expect they would do here liberally.
But the fucking, what's the term? What's a gang term for this? Like a mafia term? Jig is up? I don't know. The federal government is not only coming after Donald Trump, but also the gabagoo is on the counter. They're also coming after Donald Trump's organization for tax fraud over the course of many years. Up to $2 million of fraud, as a matter of fact. Donald Trump's CFO pled guilty today. Let's take a look at what happened.
Big development now in another high-profile case we're following involving the former president. This one involves the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and Alan Weisselberg, the former longtime chief financial officer of the former president's namesake company. He is expected to plead guilty tomorrow to a 15-year tax fraud scheme, according to a source familiar with the matter. Now, the terms of the deal, they are still being finalized. Weisselberg may end up testifying against the company. That's despite the fact that he's not entered into a cooperation agreement with prosecutors. I'm joined now by CNN's Kara Scannell, who's been following it. What exactly is he pleading guilty to, and what does that mean that he's not entering into a cooperating agreement?
Right. So Alan Weisselberg was indicted last year along with the Trump Organization. And it was in a 15-count indictment going back 15 years that he was involved in this off-the-books compensation scheme, basically not paying taxes on some corporate benefits he got, like a company apartment, car leases, and
so the Trump Organization would pay his car lease, would pay school tuition for his grandkids or things like that?
Exactly. And then he wasn't paying income tax on them. He's going to admit to all of this tomorrow, according to sources. He will plead guilty to the entire indictment, and he's agreed to testify at trial. The Trump Organization, the corporate entity, no individual, is going to trial in October on these charges. Now, they have had testimony from other people. They've had an accountant who has worked with the Trump Organization, who has testified before the grand jury, but this will be a live witness. It will be Alan Weisselberg, the longtime CFO. He's been with the company for 40 years, going to testify against the company if it gets to trial.
Is it just testifying in this particular scheme against the company, or the company and other things they may have been involved with?
Well, that's the thing here. This is just for his testimony in the tax fraud trial. You know, remember, he got charged with this because prosecutors were trying to put pressure on him to cooperate in their much broader investigation into the Trump Organization's finance and whether they misled lenders and insurers. But Weisselberg was not willing to cooperate with that investigation. So they was indicted a year ago, July. He's on the cusp of the trial in October. He just lost some motions to dismiss the indictment. He's now come to terms and said he's going to cooperate with this investigation. And for him, he gets some certainty here because according to this deal, he would serve 5 months in prison with time off for good behavior. We're looking at 100 days. But these days would be served in Rikers Island, you know, the notorious New York City jail. But he gets the benefit of not having to go to trial, to potentially get convicted, to face anywhere from 1 to 3 years in prison to as much as 15 years in a New York State prison. So that's kind of the calculus for him. He gets some certainty. He knows he will serve a limited prison term, and he will offer this cooperation.
And what's next for the criminal investigation in New York? Is that still ongoing?
Well, it's still ongoing, but as you probably remember, the previous District Attorney Cy Vance had authorized his prosecutors to move forward with an indictment or to seek an indictment before the grand jury against the former president. The new District Attorney Alvin Bragg came in, reviewed the evidence, and said he didn't think there was enough there. One of the issues is they didn't have a cooperator. They didn't have someone like Weisselberg who was willing to tell the story behind the numbers. That investigation has slowed down. Sources tell me it's still ongoing, but there remains a lot of questions of what could they get that would satisfy the new DA that they have enough to bring an indictment when they didn't after already more than 3 years of investigating.
Harris-Cannell, I appreciate it. Thanks. Joining me now to talk about it, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General and CNN legal analyst Elliot Williams. Why would they do a plea agreement with this guy if he wasn't going to cooperate in any criminal trial?
Now, believe it or not, Anderson, going to trial is really just a matter of resources and costs and benefits that prosecutors have to think through. And does it make more sense to go to trial and run the risk of losing and spend the resources of your time, your energy, your prosecutors, or guarantee that you get a conviction and someone going to jail? It sounds sort of odd to the
But it sounds like prosecutors kind of blinked. They decided, well, we'd rather get the conviction than go to
nothing,
trial.
and lose, and maybe lose, because so much of what would have been on trial here is subjective. Now, some of it, there would be financial statements and records and so on. But this question, this is what Kara was talking about a little bit earlier. When we're talking about compensation or tuition being paid.
Plea bargains are the backbone of the American court system for the reasons that he just adequately explained. What is it, like 90% or something? Yeah, remember when I interviewed Trump's other lawyer, Michael Cohen? 97%, 99.7%?
Paid. There's a question of, well, maybe this might have actually been part of his compensation package. And a jury could have been tricked by that or at least been confused enough by it to not get a conviction.
Rudy Giuliani testified before a grand jury in Georgia. The fact that he is a target, has been informed he's a target of this investigation. How does that influence his testimony?
So here's the thing. So many people think they can just...
Wait, you guys don't remember? I did. I interviewed Michael Cohen. Yeah, or rather, funnier than that, Michael Cohen interviewed me on his podcast from his house arrest. He has a house arrest podcast, and he interviewed me on his house arrest podcast.
Talk their way out of testimony. And maybe, and we know, we've seen Rudy Giuliani publicly, maybe he thought he might have been able to save him.
Most un-American thing that you can do. Same with these anti-protest bills. It completely goes against the First Amendment. It is the most un-American thing that you can push for, and it's going to be very damaging. A lot of Republicans were doing this before Donald Trump and pulled these anti-protest bills where you can drive into protesters with your car, and that would make it legal to do things like that. After the terrorist attack in Charlottesville, after the Unite the Right rally. Same with these anti-protest bills. It completely goes against the First Amendment.
Yeah, I did that shit. Bro, I've been around the fucking block. All you young ones have no idea. You're like, you're new fans. You don't even know. I've done debates. I've done interviews with so many motherfuckers.
By talking. If his lawyers were smart, they probably advised him to just keep his mouth shut because of the tremendous risk of jeopardizing his own rights if he does ultimately get charged with a crime.
So he could have just pled the Fifth during this?
Yeah, and oddly enough, that can take 5 or 6 hours because every question other than, what's your name, Rudy Giuliani? Like, so for instance, how long have you served as Donald Trump's lawyer? I plead the Fifth because that could come up in a conspiracy trial. Every possible fact. And so hour after hour, they were probably going through every question.
Can they just do a blanket, I plead the Fifth?
I mean, they could, but prosecutors have a tremendous amount of information and they want to get him on the record, at least pleading the Fifth. But again, it seems...
Honestly, though, a lot of you in here right now, 4 years, 5 years down the line, when Andrew Tate is the president of the United States of America, will probably look back and go, remember when you debated the president of the United States of America? Squashed the beef with Logan Paul and Jake Paul and ran on a Tate Paul ticket? How crazy is that? And now he's the president. Remember, we used to make the Bugatti jokes.
Odd, but, and it can take an entire day of doing that. And we saw that with the president quite recently.
There is a federal hearing tomorrow.
Yeah, 5 years later, and women are made illegal. Yeah. Andrew Tate becomes president, first order of business, executive order, women are illegal, boys only.
tomorrow in Florida regarding the unsealing of the affidavit that was used to get the search warrant in Mar-a-Lago, which point out CNN and other news organizations have been pushing to try to get it actually released. The Justice Department obviously does not want it released. What's the likelihood that it would get released?
I would say highly, highly, highly unlikely that it ever gets released because of the fact that, number one, you want to protect the rights of innocent people who are named in it. Number two, you want to protect your evidence. Number three, you want to protect your agents and the work that they're doing. Usually courts defer to the Justice Department or prosecutors when they say, we will jeopardize our case or our investigation here if this becomes public.
And the Department of Justice had already said that. They've already said, look, this is going to deter any witnesses.
So the judge would have to supersede that in effect and say, you know what, Justice Department, you don't know what's best for your own cases, and the fact that there are innocent people here. You know what? There's enough public interest here. Let's make it public.
Could the judge rule that they would redact, any agents' names, any witness names?
Okay. If they redact this document, Anderson, it's basically going to be a search on whatever date, August 5th or whatever, black box for 5 pages, 20 pages.
Elliot Williams, appreciate it.
Thanks, Anderson.